Okay, now you may well know that there have been only two nuclear bombs ever dropped in the history of the world during warfare. And you may also know that a lot of people would consider, when you look at all the circumstances surrounding the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that they were really largely civilian targets and that this was done only as a way to convince the Japanese to surrender unconditionally. A lot of people think these should have been considered war crimes by the United States, but I'm not here to talk about that. You are unlikely to know, but it's always possible you know, that the person who signed the orders to drop those nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was named Thomas Handy, and he was my great uncle, my father's brother. But I'm not here to talk about that. You may also know that were the third and fourth most devastating air raids in history. They were not the two biggest ones like you might think. The bombing of Tokyo and the bombing of Dresden were both considered worse, and I'm a little bit here to talk about that. Now, okay, so first of all, you got to know that when Tokyo was being bombed, and Dresden as well, they were dropping fire bombs. And the reason was because in each of these cities, most of the buildings were made. In Tokyo, the buildings were mostly made of wood and with paper walls. That was the tradition at the time. And in Dresden, most of the buildings were made of wood. And so as a result, fire was a great way to burn the city up. And this was like literally living through hell for the people who survived it. Firestorms started. If you don't know what a firestorm is, imagine it gets so hot that the oxygen in the air itself is bursting into flames, causing the fire to keep on growing. Tornadoes made of fire moving across the city. Honestly, reading accounts of it, it's hard to imagine how anyone survived. And there's a book called Slaughterhouse-Five, written by Kurt Vonnegut, where he talks about a World War II American soldier who was held as a prisoner of war in a slaughterhouse and was thus protected with the other prisoners of war from the devastation of Dresden. And this was semi-autobiographical. Kurt Vonnegut says he was there during that event. But the soldier he's detached from time and begins experiencing his life in a non-chronological fashion. And he's abducted by aliens, where he goes and he lives in kind of a human zoo with a movie star from like the 1920s. And it's this whole thing. And people have read this book, and most critics say what this book is about is the trauma that somebody would experience, causing them to live their life in this kind of detached way where they can't exist. They can't consume their own life in a chronological fashion because they keep going back to other moments because of the trauma. And Kurt Vonnegut has replied to that, no, it's a science fiction story about a guy who becomes detached from time and then goes up with aliens and lives with a movie star. He's saying this is literally just the story I wrote. It's not meant to be an exploration of trauma. And this gets into a thing we call death of the author, where we're not talking about the author actually dying. We're saying that as soon as the author has created a work and put it out into the world, the author is dead. Now it is the world's to interpret it. But what I like to talk about, what I'm really here to talk about, is a scene in the Rodney Dangerfield movie Back to School, where Rodney Dangerfield has cheated on a paper, and he hired Kurt Vonnegut to write a paper about Slaughterhouse-Five. And when he turns into the teacher reads it and goes, whoever you hired to write this for you knows nothing about Kurt Vonnegut. And that's what they're talking about. Nobody got the joke because you don't know that Kurt Vonnegut has been... So that's what I was here to talk about, just to tell you that.